Lovely, thank you very much. So welcome everybody to this meeting of transport subcommittees. It's the first one I've chaired. I'm very pleased to be here and it's great to see so many people. We've got currently 40 people on the call. This is an annual meeting, of course, getting together all the district subcommittees so that we can all have a look at the most pressing issues. And there's lots to discuss, of course, around transport at the moment. And great that we're a devolved combined authority with a mayor, which means we get more powers and hopefully more progress towards the ambitions that we all need to fulfill for our places. So before we start, let's just do a few introductions. My name is Susan Hinchcliffe. I'm leader of Bradford and I'm the leader for transport on the combined authority. We have Councillor Kim Groves. Councillor Groves, do you want to wave? Councillor Groves is the lead member for bus transport in particular, but knows about all things transport related, so I rely on her very heavily. I don't know if we've got Councillor Korshik on, have we today? I'm not sure if Councillor Korshik is due in this meeting. Can't see her, but I might be. It goes over several pages, does this. Councillor Korshik is our lead member for active travel for the region anyway, if she comes on at some stage. I think I also just introduced the district chairs who are also on the transport committee, of course, but they convene their own groups back at base to hear what members of the public and their committee members in the districts have to say about transport, and a really important element of making sure that we're listening to the voices of all the districts and all corners of West Yorkshire. So I'll start with Councillor Taj Salam from Bradford. Councillor Salam, would you like to wave?
Hi everybody, Councillor Salam from Bradford.
Thank you very much. And then we have Wakefield, Councillor Alan Garbett. I can't see him any yet, but hopefully he'll be on shortly. And then we have Councillor Lou Cunningham from Leeds. Councillor Cunningham.
Afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. And we have Councillor Homewood from the Kirk Leeds.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Homewood. And then Councillor Sutherland from Calderdale. So we're probably still waiting for Wakefield and Calderdale, but hopefully they will turn up very shortly. So the agenda. Yep.
Sorry, I was just going to say that Councillor Garbett, I believe, was trying to respond but was on mute, and Councillor Korshik's just joined.
All right. So Councillor Korshik, would you like to wave at us?
I'm trying.
We'll just say hello.
Hi everyone. It's not like my camera is not. It's so many technical problems are coming. I'll try my best.
Don't worry. As long as you can hear us and we can hear you, that's fine.
I can hear you, but it's that's still fine. My camera is still not working.
Don't worry about it. And Councillor Garbett's there as well. Did you say, Dominic? Oh, hello, Councillor Garbett, who's waving at us there. So we're just missing Councillor Sutherland, but otherwise we've got all the district chairs here, which is good. So anybody else, Dominic, before we start the agenda proper? Are we all right to go now?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So the agenda today is going to be very much about the National Bus Strategy and Bus Service Improvement Plan. This has got to be submitted by the end of October. So it's a really good opportunity for us all to have a look at this presentation and comment, given the comments you may already have received, what priorities are from your district areas. And this isn't all the only engagement, of course. There's a whole engagement strategy around this, talking to members of the public and key stakeholders about what they think should be in the bus improvement plan. David, do you want to put? Thank you very much. It's just part of it, but it'd be really helpful to hear people's views. We're going to start with Dave Pearson presenting that plan. We also have Helen Ellerton, I can see as well. Helen, do you want to wave? There's also on buses for the Combined Authority. And is there anybody else that we should introduce in the Combined Authority whilst we're here, Dave? Oh, Andrew Bradley waved at me. Thank you, Andrew. Are you a bus person as well?
I am head of customer services.
Well, that sounds quite important in that case. So we've got Head of Customer Services, we've got Helen Elton and Dave Pearson.
And we've got our colleague Tom Locke, who's going to drive the slides for us as well. So
and I understand Tom Locke is writing the submission word by word. So
he is, yes. Tom has that an enviable task of capturing what we say this afternoon, but also sort of basically pulling the document together for members to approve in October.
That's lovely. Well, congratulations, Tom, I think.
Thank you very much.
Dave, shall I ask you then to present from here?
Right, okay. Thank you, Councillor Hinchcliffe. The format of this afternoon really is we just want to do a little bit of scene setting and tell you how far we've got with the bus service improvement plan, and then to basically have a series of discussions around key themes to do with buses, essentially. We'll talk about fares and ticketing, then we'll talk about the bus network, then we'll talk about the highway and road infrastructure and how that can support buses, and then we'll sort of wash up to any other things that you think we should be incorporating in this plan. And then I think what we wanted to end up with is for you to be thinking, what is the big issue that you want us to be considering in this plan? What's the most important thing for you in terms of how we might move forward on buses? So if you can be given some thought to that as we go through, that would be really, really useful, and we can try and capture that little bit at the end. And then if you want to either put it in the chat on the meeting, or alternatively, if you want to drop us a line, then that's absolutely fine. So I don't really want to spend a lot of time doing a big detailed presentation, and I know Dominic sent this out to you earlier in the week, so I'll sort of move fairly quickly through this so that we can have plenty of time for discussions. But just a little bit of context in terms of where we start. Government issued its National Bus Strategy back in March. It's a strong strategy in terms of the role of buses within the transport network, and I think it's quite key that it does actually recognise the fact that the deregulated environment hasn't worked for buses, and that we need to strengthen that from the future. So I think that's a bit of context that we sort of start with. But in setting the National Bus Strategy, then the government have set as a deadline by which we've got to produce this thing called the Bus Service Improvement Plan. And that basically sets out what we want to do with buses in West Yorkshire, and sets out how we're going to deliver on the big themes in the National Bus Strategy. It's given the rather clunky Bus Back Better strapline as a title. I'm sure they could have done better than that, but that's what it is. And I think as that slide says there, the sort of key themes and is a faster, more reliable, more frequent bus service, to look at fares and to move away from this complexity of fares of different companies having different prices, and customers really struggling to know what the best value is. We need to look at how the bus network can evolve to meet more modern and up-to-date travel demands. If we want to get more people using the bus, in particular moving people from private car and other methods, we've got to make it easy to understand. We've got to make it easy to use, and we've got to make buses link better with other modes of transport, which would include trains, but it will also include walking and cycling, and how a bus journey fits into a wider journey. So that's the government strategy. The sort of homework piece that they've set all local transport authorities is to produce this plan by October, and if we submit this plan, then there's a funding stream that sits behind this, and so our plan is also a bidding document into that funding stream. So we've got a very, very tight deadline to do this, and on top of that, Tom, if you want to move to the next slide, we've had as I'm sure you were all aware, Tracy Brabin was elected as the West Yorkshire Mayor in May, and Tracy has a number of pledges, one of which is to bring buses back under public control, introduce simpler fares, contactless ticketing, and greener buses. And that's a commitment the Mayor's made to buses, and that sort of overlays the work that we're doing in terms of developing this bus service improvement plan. So it's not a plan that's just reacting to government. This is a plan that actually sets out what our ambition for buses is going forward. So lots of discussions you've probably seen in the media and probably read in committee reports and that sort of thing. That the other aspect of this is that the Bus Services Act provides various different ways in which local transport authorities like the Combined Authority and bus companies can interact to strengthen the sort of collective role in terms of managing the bus service. And one of the requirements that we've had to do is actually follow the Bus Services Act in terms of establishing the governance methodology that we're going to use for buses going forward. And where we've got to in West Yorkshire is accepting the fact that buses are very important to people, a very, very clear message that Tracy and Councillor Hinchcliffe and others in the elections earlier this year got from the residents of West Yorkshire is that buses are important. And so what we're proposing to do is to establish a much more formal partnership with bus operators, but also to start looking at whether or not some more fundamental change in the form of a franchising regime might be appropriate. So if Tom can move to the next rather busy slide, what that does, and this is the plan which the Combined Authority approved back in June, is take us by a series of steps into producing this bus service improvement plan, producing and entering into a partnership with bus operators, looking at whether franchising can deliver the plan in a more effective way for residents, bringing all of that together next year and the year after, so that we make starting improving bus services almost straight away, but B, look to see how that's going by the time we get to towards the end of 2023, before we make some definite recommendations to the Mayor and to the Combined Authority about what the long-term plan in terms of the governance and management of bus services going forward is. So we're on a roadmap, if you like, to change from the deregulated environment to an environment that works much better for bus passengers. So the first step along that map is the Bus Service Improvement Plan. So if Tom, you want to move to that. And that's the plan we've got to write. That's the plan we're busy doing at the moment. And that's what we want to talk to you about this afternoon. And you will see in that table, fares and ticketing, customer services, bus network, communications, marketing, vehicle emissions, air quality and environmental standards, and bus priority and highway infrastructure are the key work streams, and our plan is built around those, and we're going to talk you through where we've got to with each of those in the next minute or two, and then we'll open up a discussion on each one as we go through. So just sort of picking those off as we go through. Tom, if you want to go to the next one. This is what a bus service improvement plan has to be. And so these are the sort of key bits of the bus strategy that we need to address as we go through the bus service improvement plan. And hopefully you've had an opportunity to read through that. But these are almost the questions that we've got to answer in our bus service improvement plan and how we go about it.
I'm not sure everybody has seen these papers, to be quite honest. They weren't sent over with the agenda from my email.
Oh, okay. So. Apologies.
Okay. It's just I was going to ask if it could be circulated afterwards, but
we'll certainly circulate it again. Yes, there's no issues with that. I was under the impression that they'd gone out to everybody. If they haven't, apologies. But I'm sure it's background reading, but I didn't particularly want to do a long description of each slide. So that's sort of, those are the things that the bus service improvement plan need to cover. And I think we'll get into the detail of that as we go through. And if we go to the next slide, Tom. The Transport Committee in July established a sort of set of vision and objectives for this strategy, and I think it's worth sort of reflecting on those before we get into the discussions. Buses need to contribute to economic productivity. They've got to provide a more sustainable and environmentally sustainable option that helps us meet our environmental targets, and it's got to sustain social inclusive growth and social well-being of ambitions. It's got to support the wider objectives for the communities in West Yorkshire, and so to do that, we want to establish bus as a key mode of transport. We need to establish a bus service is financially sustainable, the virtual sort of circle of generating more bus passengers and the fares that they pay help generate and improve the service as it goes through. We need to improve the operational delivery of services. Our operator colleagues sort of struggle with their buses through the traffic often, and we need to provide a service that people need to feel confident in and address some of the punctuality, reliability, and other issues that are key to people feeling confident that they use the bus. We've got to look at some of those communities who are not well served by bus, and deal with some of the inequality issues that causes, and particularly the links between some communities and where the jobs that those communities, the people in those communities might want to travel to. And we need to see the bus as an integrated part of the transport piece. So those are the objectives that the Transport Committee set. We've got a little slide now on the timelines that we're working to, and just to give a little bit of context. Obviously, we're in August now, so we're in the process of preparing the bus service improvement plan, and we do that very closely with the bus operators, who obviously whose staff and assets are the key to delivering bus service. We submit that by the end of October to government. Then we have a process to formalise the partnership between the combined authority, the bus operators, and the local councils, because I think it's important that is a three-way piece. And we've got a very definite sort of statutory process to go through the winter and into spring for, so that we've got an enhanced partnership that's ready to be formal from April onwards, but also that we start the process of improving bus services almost straight away. And in that context, even the last month, we've launched the fare deal for young people, where we've simplified the fare structure for under 19s. We've launched the Leeds core bus network, which is a new mapping style to make the buses easier to understand in Leeds, that we're going to roll out to the rest of West Yorkshire in the coming years. So we started already in terms of bus improvements. So that sort of is a bit of a scene setting. So we'll stop there, and happy to answer any questions that people have about how we get to this particular point, and then we can get into the discussions on fares and ticketing as being the next issue we want to talk and discuss with you.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Do you want to take that presentation down then? Is that it of the presentation?
No, we'll keep the presentation up.
All right,
because we've got some content to talk about in it.
Okay. Well, Councillor Scullion is asking if she can have the roadmap on email. Presumably, Councillor Scullion, do you mean that last slide with the Gantt chart on?
I think Councillor Scullion means the busier one earlier on.
Yeah. I think it's important, and for those of us as councillors, in terms of the council as a whole understanding, and our various partner organisations, and within our own political groups. And I think clearly we've got the October deadline, but it'd just be very, very good to just keep a very tight eye on each of those bits that are going through. This is crucial. absolutely crucial for us in Calderdale. You know, buses are our absolute lifeblood. And, you know, I think as a committee and as a group of councils, we really, really want to be absolutely on top of that timetable. So that would be extremely useful.
So we've heard. Is that okay, Dave? Then
yes, yes. We'll circulate the presentation, but we'll pull out that particular slide and send that as a separate thing as well, because that's going to be our life for the next 2-3 years. So it's useful for members to have that to hand as well.
Lovely, thank you. James Craig in the chat is just saying that should we include Northern Rail as a fourth partner, given the connectivity strategy and the bus rail timetable and integration? What's your view on that, Dave?
Yes. It's really important that everything we do here links across other modes of travel, including rail, and we do have very close arrangements with Northern Rail as well. So I think the linkages will be kept. I think the slight distinction is that the way in which the Bus Services Act sets out how we would establish an enhanced partnership is very much between the Transport Authority, the Highway Authority, and the bus companies, and that's a sort of it sets that up. But that absolutely doesn't mean that there's no engagement and read across and involvement with rail and with cycling and walking and active modes as well.
Councillor Salam, did you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. I think we've had discussions and it's good to see the presentation and the roadmap. But I think there's a number of things that we need to actually consider while we're talking about buses and public transport. I mean, buses, like Dave says, and are very, very important to our communities. Biggest mileage deliverer and biggest journey deliverer is the buses. We talk about faster and reliable services. I mean, the only way we're going to get faster and more reliable services is if we actually have bus priorities on every single corridor, wherever we go on the main corridors. Now, that might not be physically possible in most of the cases, but where we do have bus priority lanes, then you see journey times improve massively. Cheaper ticketing, I'm not really sure how we're going to actually achieve that unless everybody, all the operators buy into that. Because currently, Dave, my gripe is that everybody's got their own ticketing pricing, and everybody's either trying to undercut each other or they want everybody to buy their ticketing rather than integrated ticketing. And I think integrated ticketing is the most important thing. More, easier to understand and easier to use. That, I think, a passenger, when they come out of their house, that's what they're looking for. Which bus do I get to so-and-so? And looking at the timetables on the bus stops or in bus stations, we've got to make it a lot easier to understand and easier to use. Better integration, yes, that is the most important thing also. I mean, it's not always about better integration. My gripe always about taxis, because if you put people in taxis, then you're not getting out of their private cars. So it's got to be about public transport solely. But at the same time, we've got to make sure that the buses are going to where people's needs are, whether it's schools, whether it's supermarkets, whether it's hospitals, whether it's town centers, whichever place where people's needs are. But at the same time, we don't just concentrate on main corridors. We concentrate on the outer skirts of our districts also, or housing estates. Because, give you an example, one of the housing estates in my ward, West Bowling, if you miss the bus and if you want to walk, then either you can actually walk over to Roolie Lane and get a 508 and then get off at Dudley roundabout and then get another bus into town, or you can walk 1.2 miles other side to Manchester Road and you can get a bus there because you haven't got. So, those people, they're not, if it's the weather is not good, if it's dark, if it's, anything else that is deterring them from going and standing at a bus stop. They're not going to do that. So what's the cheap other option? Call a taxi. So therefore, we've got to look at all these things, in a package. And so therefore, for me, easier to understand, easier to use, cheaper and more frequent, and better infrastructure are the number of bullet points that I would actually put down in this improvement plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Salam. So you can do all that, can't you, Dave?
with everybody else's help.
That's what we want. Yeah. We want it now. So I think a lot of us would agree with what Councillor Salam has raised there as priorities, and I think we're going to come to those as well to discuss in more detail later in the meeting, Councillor Salam, and I think Dave will outline some of those when we go on to the next slides. Somebody just put in the chat, are the bus operators bound to cooperate with the bus improvement plan?
That's an interesting question, really. I mean, I think what we want to do is to develop it in partnership, because at the end of the day, they employ the drivers, they own the buses, they have the lion's share of the resource and the services. The bus operators are very much aware that government funding, not just the 3 billion that's available under the bus service improvement plan, but also the general bus service supports that government have provided to bus operators, bearing in mind over the last 18 months, the bus services and the bus operators have been protected from the effects of the pandemic financially by taxpayers' money, both from the government and from the Combined Authority. I think if they didn't, there would be an element of biting the hand, I think. But I think the other thing that is I think probably obvious from the roadmap and from the position we're taking is that if bus operators aren't able to fully commit to delivering a better service for people of West Yorkshire, then that might lead us more into needing to take franchising powers to essentially to direct them to. And so I think the incentive at this particular stage is if we want to recover bus patronage from the pandemic, if we want to maintain the level of public and develop maintain the level of public funding and develop the passengers and patronage and develop their businesses, then it's very much in their interest to do that. And I think that's basically where this sits at the moment. But I think, as Councillor Salam intimated, they're all individual companies. They are going to adopt some strategies to maximise the benefit to them. And I think we're not naive to that either.
Thank you, Dave. And how do we know whether it's been a success? Will we have some numbers in there to show?
Yes, because I think that's quite key to doing that. I mean, obviously, these things do need measurement. We do need to understand and measure success, and what does success look like. I think so. It's quite an odd time to have this conversation, having had a pandemic that's decimated bus patronage, and it's just building back up. As we sit here this afternoon, but that said, we will set targets for the numbers of people using the service, the number of people using buses as opposed to other modes of transport like private car. We'll set targets in terms of punctuality, reliability, and average journey times for buses. We will use customer satisfaction measures as being a very key aspect of whether or not people in West Yorkshire feel like the bus service is working better for them. So there's a range of different measurements that we will use to measure success. And when we come to that decision point that the Mayor and the members of the Combined Authority will need to make in terms of, has this been a success after the first 18 months or so of the enhanced partnership, then we'll clearly measure success against those measurable things.
Okay, thank you very much. I can't see anybody else indicate them, and I'm having to look at your practical, your virtual raised hands because I can't really see anybody very well with this presentation up. So if anybody has any questions just on the first part of that presentation, we're about to go on to fares and ticketing. But if anybody has anything else on the overview that we've just been through, speak now.
Sorry, Chair. Councillor
Yes.
Salam here.
Yeah.
I thought James might come in, but if he hasn't, the other thing, when we talk about integration, I think cycling and walking is also very, very important. Now, we are doing a lot of work around cycle parks in train stations and also in bus stations. But sometimes, unless just having a sort of like a barrier just to lock your cycle against is not enough there. I mean, what we need a proper locking up of bikes. Because I mean, if I've got a bike which costs me £4,500, I'm not just going to leave it in open. So therefore, that is also most important. The other thing is that if we are doing any improvement works to any of the railway stations and bus stations, we've got to also look at access. I mean, I know myself and Martin have been arguing about low more, where if I'm coming off the Greenway, I've got to carry my bike. Now, mine is very light bike, but if somebody's got one of those electric bikes, they are very, very heavy for them to be carried. Otherwise, I would have to do a massive loop to come on off the Greenway, through the park, onto the main road, and then into the railway station. So therefore, we've got to keep those in mind also, because for me, cycling and walking is also as much important as the last mileage delivery.
Thank you, Councillor Salam. Dave, I hope you agree with that.
Yes. I think all of those. I think Councillor Salam illustrates a few examples actually of where we don't quite join things up together particularly well, and I think that's entirely right. And we do need to give better protection to Councillor Salam's very expensive bike.
He does use it a lot, to be fair. So I'd like
I'm sure he does.
Value for money from it. But
I'm sure he does.
Okay, so
I wonder if I might just say a couple of things.
Who is it? Can you just say who you are? So
I'm Clive Woods, Airbus Civic Society, and also on the Leeds Passenger Forum. And I'm just reflecting that I thought we'd had a partnership. And my concern is that we have these very laudable intentions. I'd agree with everything Councillor Salam has said, but the reality often doesn't match. And I mean, I've attended over the last, 15 years, consultations about LTP2, LTP3 with equally laudable aims. But when I look at what's happened to buses in our area, the numbers using them have gone down, the services have declined in frequency, we're getting lots of cancellations, and I really would like to know whether there's actually a log kept of all the cancellations and where they are. And that makes it very difficult to persuade local people to trust the bus. So it really is quite difficult. I mean, it's a big undertaking. I think even before COVID, numbers of passengers in West Yorkshire have been in decline. So, I'm just, it's what happens on the ground, good intentions. So we must measure, and accountability is going to be everything. But I'm just concerned that we've had a partnership, and yet in our area, near the airport, bus services have been reduced in frequency, journey times have increased. We've been asking for bus priority along large stretches of the routes, and nothing has happened. So, it's what happens. And I think the local context is quite important and quite difficult here, because people know where railways run, but for buses, it's much more local. And so I don't know whether other areas have experienced the same problems. Thank you.
Okay, so I think what Clive's saying there, that how do we know this is going to be any different, I suppose. Councillor Groves, did you want to come in on that? I don't know if you were responding to that when you put your hand up, or it was another point you were coming in on. Can't hear you, Councillor Groves. Oh, intriguing. So you're speaking, but we can't hear you. Try again. No, we can't hear you. So I'll go back to Dave just to respond to that, and perhaps Councillor Groves can try and sort out our IT in the meantime. Dave?
Yes, I think that's a fair challenge that Clive makes. I think what's different this time is this is actually structurally different in terms of the way in which the bus service works. And I think we've had previous local transport plans, as he points out, and other arrangements where it essentially has been trying to and putting investment, and even on Clive's route, there has been investment to the Leeds end of that route to improve bus performance. But I think what's different this time is this actually addresses the root of deregulation, of the separation of bus companies from public authorities, and tries to structurally change that to incorporate more fundamentally the funding streams, and to push the bus industry into multi-operator ticketing and other things that they were probably reluctant to move towards voluntarily in days gone by. So it's going to be a challenge, and I'm sure Clive and others will tell me in a year or two's time how well it's doing or not. But I think it is different now, because I think it's structural now.
So I think we all have to share the same ambitions, Clive. Let's make sure that we make some progress with this Monday, hopefully, that we're going to receive. Councillor Groves, are you back, or?
I'm here, but I've had to go onto another device.
We can hear you though.
Yeah, I just need to get back in the office. So on Clive's point, I take his point about, patronage declining, but it's declining up and down the country. So that's nothing unique to West Yorkshire. We simply have to, I think, going forward, all the things that we've discussed are relevant, but we have to accept that if we need a network to grow, we need to look at a new way of running buses and new models, and the system is broken. It has to be 21st century, it has to be digital, and it has to be integrated, and it has to go to the places that people want to get to. I think Councillor Sam Lamb was right about it's got to go to employment zones, it's got to go to anchor organisations like the hospitals. But in terms of the LIPTIC 2 and LIPTIC 3, things don't happen overnight, and I think West Yorkshire is well placed in terms of all the work that Leeds City Council have done with LIPTIC on the bus priority corridors, all the work that's going on through transforming cities to have more bus corridors, but also fantastic new bus stations right across West Yorkshire. And I think that all coming together is going to take time. And so it's not just going to be about what's going into the bus improvement plan, it's about so much more. And I think we do have to work with the operators to offer different models. We've got a DRT running in East Leeds that's on trial at the moment, which will move out to Calderdale. And we have got operators who are servicing employment zones just outside of Leeds. So it's about new models. In terms of West Yorkshire, you can look at London, you can look at the London model, but the 700 million in deficit. So the fare box is really important in all of this. And I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you. So, yeah, I think there's lots of changes that need to make it a better bus service, and therefore, if there's a better bus service, more people will use it inevitably, which is what we all want. I think we're going on now, I think, to fares and ticketing, Dave. So
yes,
if that's all right, because this is something that's come up frequently during the
What
year.
we want to do is just have some short 5-10 minute chats around each of the key areas of the bus service improvement plan. So if we start with fares and ticketing, lots of words bandied around in various strategies. People like simplicity, they like convenience of payment, they like to feel like they're getting value for money. One of the things we will need to do with this is actually get underneath what those things mean, and how can we sort of deliver on those things. And underneath those three sort of blocks are some interesting questions, which we won't go through question by question, but just to pull a few out, just to think about them. For example, our ticketing structure in West Yorkshire actually gives discounts to regular users and charges irregular walk-up fares, if you want to call them. They charge, those people are charged the higher rate, and the people who travel regularly are charged a discounted rate. Question, and you can argue either way, is that a right model to actually encourage more people to use the service? Is that the right model given the impacts, the long-term impact of working from home on the travel demand? So those are the sort of questions we need to start thinking about. Lots of people like flat fares, but then if you establish one fare for all journeys, where do you pitch that? Because if you pitch it at one level, then quite a lot of people will be paying more. If you pitch it at another level, then it's quite cheap, but then the whole network system loses money and needs to generate a lot more passengers to be able to make up that difference. So these are the sort of trade-offs and challenges which we need to make, and that latter one is quite noticeable, because to a certain extent we want the virtuous circle of more people travelling, paying more into the system to be able to have more bus services. That's the sort of approach we want to see coming out of this. But the detail around fares is actually quite key. So if we move on to a few sort of questions just to throw into the mix, is a uniform flat fare, or is a series of fares, but a simpler set of fares the sort of thing we should be looking for? Should all fares be the same? Because they're not at the moment. Bus fares in Halifax are cheaper than bus fares in Leeds. That's fact. And is that right or wrong? It's a question. We have a contactless capping system in London where you will never pay more than a set amount, no matter how much you travel. People generally say that's something we'd like to see in West Yorkshire, but just testing that out with you as well. And in particular, we do have a concessionary fare scheme at the moment, which reduces the price of travel for under 19s and makes free travel for elderly and disabled people. Are there particular customer groups we should be targeting discounts and fares offers? So they're just a few questions to throw out there, but I just thought maybe spend the next 5 minutes on questions around fares.
Thank you, Dave. I mean, certainly in businesses I've worked before, you incentivise trial purchase. So there is a cheaper fare for those people who've not used your product before to entice them to try it. Yeah. And therefore, it does. When you talked about it as you did in there, that obviously your loyal customers get a discount, but people who try it have to pay a premium. That does sound a bit wrong, doesn't it? Really,
it does. But that's how it's been for many years, and that's an interesting. It is an interesting observation, isn't it? That and although I think those of us who've done the jobs like we do, sort of knew this. It's only when we've actually really dug into it, then a penny drops that actually that is how it's structured, and is that one of the reasons why people stop using the bus and don't come back? So, question.
The entry level is too high. It could well be. So I've got Mohammed Raja. Mohammed Raja, I don't know if you're there where all those palm trees are, or if that's just an exotic picture of you on holiday.
That is an exotic picture of me in Florida, in Tampa when we were there. But I am on video as well. This is so I can see my screen a little bit better. Right, I think just to say who I am, I'm Mohammed Raja, and I'm the Interim Operation Manager for First Bradford. When I'm speaking, I'm actually speaking from my own personal point of view. And I think the question that I would ask Dave is, Dave, even though we're talking about simple fares and ticketing, have we actually been around and had a look at any systems that are in place now? The reason I ask that is because I was in Edinburgh not so long ago, and I've never really used public transport in Edinburgh, so I was there as a visitor. But going onto their website, I found it so simple to understand. And basically their slogan is tap, tap, cap. And you could either tap your card and pay a maximum of £4.20 throughout the day, or the maximum fare for an adult from wherever that was £1.80 per journey. So that's where we were just talking about where do we start a fare structure from, and 90 pence for a child. I did find it quite easy to use, and is this something that we could probably integrate within West Yorkshire? I know that we have several operators, so I'm not sure how that would work if we all came and had different ticketing systems, but certainly in Edinburgh with Lothian Regional Transport, that simply worked quite well for me as a visitor and easy to understand.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's a good
Dave,
point.
before we come back on that, I just want to bring this. There's a few people wanting to speak on this. Councillor Homewood, did you want to say something? Councillor Homewood, you were indicating a moment ago. Oh, Councillor Salam, and then I'll go to Andy Dewsbury then in that case.
Thanks, Chair. I think when we were talking about easier to understand earlier on, I think this is what we actually meant, and I think what Mohammed Raja was actually saying is that when somebody goes onto the website or wherever the ticket is going to be sold, that they can actually just understand it very, very easy in the layman terms. The other thing is, I think what you were saying, Chair, earlier on, is that, in any business, you try to incite people to actually use, you go to Morrison's, you buy something for £1.65, but there's two for £2. So people actually then, are going for the £2 for two. I mean, we find it even on our buses, the group ticketing on a weekend where 5 people are traveling on one ticket, which is £8.30 or £8.50 at this moment in time. I mean, you see that so much, and so many tickets are sold for that group ticketing for weekends, and you don't just see adults, you see families, children, adults mix, and that's how you're going to incentivize these people to actually use public transport. But ticketing is the most important thing to everybody, because what they want to see is how they can travel efficiently on a bus or on a train, and how they can actually. The other thing is that in Europe, you can buy a ticket for a bus, train, and the plane at the same time. So, that's something that we may actually look for in the future. But at this moment of time, if we can buy a ticket for train and the bus at the same time, then people don't have to use, private cars or taxis to get to the train stations. They can actually use the bus, but then you've got to have that rail connection. So easier to understand, easier to use is the most important. I know I don't like that tap or whatever it is.
As long as it's simple though. So Andy Dewsbury.
Good afternoon. I say my experience was in London with the Oyster card. And when they introduced flat fares for the buses, I was initially very sceptical, but I was really impressed at how it worked there. It just made the whole process so much simpler. You don't have to negotiate with the driver where you're going to get off, which is always difficult if you don't know the routes. You just tap, get off when you see where you want to go to. You haven't got the barrier of working out which kind of ticket you want. You just tap and it works it out for you. You get the best deal. And money-wise, it actually didn't make a lot of difference, because you very rarely only take one bus a day. You're going to take 2 or 3 or 4, in which case you're going to pay the capped level anyway, even if you have to do it by buying a day ticket in the first place. So I'm very much in favour of having a simple flat fare, tap, you go on, that's it, end of problem, as it were.
I think the choice is between flat fare and contactless and capping. I don't think it's both, is it? Am I right in that?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, both.
There's a long and short answer to that.
Short would be good.
It isn't as simple as an either or. If you had a flat fare system, then you can have capping, and people don't have to tap out of the bus. If you have a more structured fare system, where people pay different amounts for how far they travel, and you want a capped system, then you've got to actually have the facility of telling the system that you've got off the bus now. Otherwise, you'll be charged the full amount. So those are the sort of choices that are set up. So those are the sort of things we need to look at. But because we have a sort of cap now, where we have a day ticket, and whilst it's probably arguably more expensive than some of the tickets operators sell for their own own services. We have the M card day ticket is essentially the most anybody should pay for a day's travel, and they can buy that on an app at the moment. So we're sort of moving a little bit in that direction.
Thank you, Dave. Somebody's also put in the chat about if we go for an Oyster scheme, will we get the funding for the necessary back office computer system through?
That is a long answer.
Well, just keep that to the end, Dave, because there's some more people want to. Yeah, I'm going to bring in at the end.
Government have identified that that's something that they will pick up as a national cost. How long it takes to get there is the question, and what do we need to do to get our system prepared for that, and maybe move by a series of steps towards it.
Okay, thank you very much. John Shepherd.
Yes, well, Dave just made the main point, which I was going to put, that we already have this. So just to follow up on that, the major problem with the all-day West Yorkshire ticket is not only that passengers who don't normally use the bus don't know about it, but that they aren't told. As one who rides on the bus and watches them get on and off, I see people ask for a day ticket, and normally the driver gives them a day ticket for his service. He doesn't say, which day ticket do you want?
Yeah.
You realise there's a choice. He just gives them the cheap one. And then, of course, later on, one is also sitting on a bus and sees passengers getting on and can't understand why their day ticket doesn't work on this bus.
Yeah, I think that's a very good observation that we're aware of, and I think that's the thing we need. That's one of the things we need to change.
Councillor Homewood.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask a question, just in terms of, is there a kind of scientific approach where we're taking here to sort of understand, what models drive usage as opposed to kind of just what our opinions are? Because I suppose for everybody's got different opinions on what might benefit them, and I suppose particularly on, so I'm thinking technologically as well, because for example, flat fares, is the benefit of those just that they're simple to understand how much you're paying, or are they something that was a lot more useful, when everybody was paying by cash? So it's easy to pay 50p or £1 for something than it is to pay 72p. But if everybody's paying on cards, for example, does that become less relevant, where actually people are just happy to pay the cheapest price available to them, particularly if there's caps involved and things like that? So I was just wondering if there was something more kind of scientific and research based that we were doing to understand how we'd actually drive up usage or getting more people into the bus network.
Thank you. So Dave, do you want to come back on those? Just add in from the chat as well. There's something being introduced as a flattened cap, if you like. So flat single fares, but with a cap once you've made X number of journeys. Is that possible as well?
It is, and these are all the options that we need to work through. Councillor Homewood makes a really good point. Yes, there's got to be some rigour that sits behind how we eventually fix what the right prescription is for West Yorkshire. And whilst I think we can learn lots of good lessons from London and Edinburgh and places like that, we also need to be mindful of the fact that West Yorkshire isn't London or Edinburgh, and in particular West Yorkshire's nature is is multi-centered. And I think that's the thing we should bear in mind in terms of how people travel around our region, is they're not all going into the same city centre as there might be into other regions, perhaps like Manchester or somewhere like that. We have a number of city and town centres that are major destination points, and we've also got people who cross boundaries to get to those destination points. So it's not quite a simpler network as perhaps it exists in some other areas, and we need a ticketing solution that reflects the fact that some people make very short journeys and some people make fairly complex journeys to get to work or to college or school or whatever. So I'm always a little bit wary of make it like London or make it like Edinburgh, because we just need to make it like West Yorkshire.
Very good. Unique. Okay, anybody else in on fares and ticketing? There's been quite a lot of chat on it as well. And people concluding that it costs a lot of money, does bus ticketing and fares.
It does.
What we'd like is free for everybody, really.
Well, yes, and that has to be paid for in a different way. So that's the balance, isn't it? We need something affordable for the end user, the customer, the passenger, affordable for the council taxpayer as well, and something that reflects the cost of providing the service in the first place, and that's the sort of financial equation which we're juggling with on these things.
Okay, fine. Clive, do you want to just come in with the last word then before we move on?
I was just thinking a lot of this is linked to marketing. I mean, yesterday I just bought some rail tickets. Northern Rail had a wonderful offer on £1 for any journey. Now, I wouldn't be normally making this journey, but seeing that, people like to get something for nothing. Buses, and they promote it well, so I knew about it. Now, we could learn from that. And when I am out in the evenings and see so many empty buses, it really grieves me. And why we can't have, I don't know, £1 flat fare after 7 p.m. or other things, gimmicks, really, just to raise the profile, as rail seem to be rather better at doing. I think in Harrogate, don't they have free transport on Sundays? I'm not sure about that.
They have done, yes. I just to give Clive a little bit of comfort. I think one of the things, one of the sort of perverse outcomes of the pandemic is actually the bus industry and the public transport industry, as evidenced by what Northern are doing, desperately need to get passengers back. So to a certain extent, there's a new approach to discounting. Some bus companies are already doing the £1 after 7 o'clock. It may come to your area sooner than you think, Clive, but I can't say any more than that.
Very enticing. So, okay. So I think we're now on to bus network design, are we?
Yes. Yeah. We'll have a touch on this. This is probably one of the big issues that longer term we need. Where do buses go, and how do buses sort of serve the travel needs that people want? Tom, if you can sort of put our very complex map up, we have sort of identified, and what we're seeking to do is to have a little bit of differentiation of different types of bus services. There are services that run very frequently, every 15 minutes or more, turn up and go. You don't necessarily need a timetable, at least during the day. You can turn up the bus stop and it'll basically take you into your nearest town or city centre. And they work a little bit like tube lines or mass transit, and we should probably promote them more. But then we also need to look at the next tier of bus services would have very much linking communities into their local centres as well. And often when I've been to meetings like this and others, it's those services that particularly people have concerns about in terms of neighbourhoods and how neighbourhoods are connected. So we do need to look at how does the bus network evolve. People are using it now, so we don't want to overly disrupt the travel patterns that people do use it, and despite the sort of frustrations we all have about the adequacy of the bus service. It is performing. It is the biggest carrier of people in West Yorkshire already, and we need to maintain those journeys, but evolve the bus service in a way in which we can do it coming forward. If we just slip to the next slide, we sort of some sort of key elements of what we need to do in terms of bus services. Councillor Groves mentioned a trial of demand responsive minibus service where people book a bus that comes to the end of their street and gives them a bespoke journey. That way we're trying that out with some developer funding and Leeds Public Transport Improvement Plan funding in Leeds, with a view to moving that across and having that in other areas as well. We're going to look at this concept that the Department for Transport have had around Superbus, where we sort of try and uplift the service, particularly around towns, where towns where bus services might have declined in recent years, just to uplift the quality of service. And so we're going to develop a 5-year plan, basically, to evolve the bus network. Clearly, any more buses on the road need to be paid for by more passengers travelling, and we need to keep that relationship going, because there's only, even with the funding we may get from government, there's only a finite amount of subsidy that can be put into that. So we've got to do this in an evolutionary rather than revolutionary way. So if we just skip to the next slide, that sort of more or less describes the sort of aspirations which we're going to have. We're gathering information both from bus operators and from local groups and other groups, just to try and identify what the bits of the network we need to enhance are, and so that's something we're gathering together in terms of a 5-year plan. So if we just move to our sort of questions which are putting out there. Firstly, I've described an evolutionary approach: take the existing network, develop it and grow it, or should we actually throw that out and start all over again? Question. Whilst we can't get into the detail of localities in a big group like this, useful to think what are the links that aren't made by the bus service. That demand responsive transport, flexibus as we're going to call it, approach. Do we think that's what people want? And again, getting back to the previous question, are there some customer groups we should be targeting, particularly to help the service be more inclusive and to serve communities that perhaps don't use buses as well as they should do, as well as they do now. So questions to put out there, and happy to take any comments that people want to make.
Thank you, Dave. I think the other thing is this money, however much we get, is one-off money, isn't it, Dave? I think so.
It is. And
it's all right having revolution, but if you can't sustain revolution beyond the money, then
that's right. And one of the techniques we would want to do is deploy what money we may get from government in this way to pump prime services to develop enough passengers for them to sustain themselves with the minimum or no levels of public funding going forward.
There needs to be something with commercial viability at the end of the
Absolutely, yes, saying. Yeah.
So I've got a few hands up now. Clive, is that a legacy hand, Clive, or is that a current hand?
Legacy, sorry.
That's okay. Andy Dewsbury, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was going to make the point that demand responsive, I think it's going to be absolutely fundamental to the future, because transport patterns are changing. And we need to model the network according to new needs, but we don't really know what the new needs are. Often I want to go between Thornton and Queensbury and Bradford. They're both on high frequency routes, but it doesn't help me doing a journey between the two because they're on different routes. And the ability to, have something demand responsive, like booking an Uber, then gives, as well as giving the passenger a means of transport, gives Metro information on where the demand really is, and therefore what the network shape should be for the future.
Data as well as feasibility.
Yes.
James, do you want to come in? Councillor Holmwood?
Yeah, thank you. It was just a point to say kind of how do we include in this the kind of strategic development plans, housing plans and employment plans that we have, obviously at West Yorkshire level and in each council area. Just as an example, in my ward that I represent, there's a strategic housing site of sort of 2,000 plus houses. Currently, no buses serve that area whatsoever, and I think it's really difficult to build kind of low car housing areas when you don't even have any current infrastructure for public transport. And I think obviously the current kind of model is you kind of wait for the demand to appear, and then theoretically the buses should turn up at some point. But I think in terms of if we're trying to make developments that reduce car from the outset, we kind of need those built into the networks in advance. So just be interested if that's kind of part of the plan, how we feed that. And I know it's not straightforward with the current model, but yeah, just wanted to add that in there.
First, chicken or egg, housing state or transport?
Just to Councillor Holmwood's point, and it's not reflected in the slide, so apologies, but we commissioned a piece of work back in 2018, 2019, accepting the fact that obviously travel demand may have changed as a result of the pandemic. And it tried to do exactly what Councillor Holmwood just suggested, which is basically saying, what's the long-term plan for the bus network, given what we know of development sites, what we know of how employment is developing. I think one of the glaringly obvious ways in which public transport networks haven't kept up with development is the out-of-town shopping and the out-of-town employment sites, which are quite difficult to serve by public transport, to be fair, but haven't and aren't. And to the other point that Councillor Holmwood makes, and there are mechanisms through planning agreements, Section 1 of 6 agreements, where we can and have done release funding for pump priming of bus services, and in fact the demand responsive transport service we're about to launch in East Leeds, its initial funding comes from developer contributions. So there are options to use that sort of mechanism of developer funding to help that. The only health warning, which I agree with Andy Dewsbury's point around demand responsive transport, but I'll just put a slight health warning that bus services and train services are financially sustained by volume of people, by lots of people paying a relatively small fare. The challenge we're going to have with demand responsive transport is they'll never be commercially viable, because the cost of providing them cannot be fully met by fares revenue, because they're quite expensive to operate, because essentially the numbers of drivers per passengers is much lower. Passengers per driver is much lower than you would get on a standard bus. So that's a bit of a challenge we're going to have with DRT, and we've got to be upfront with that. But it potentially is part of the solution.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Councillor Cunningham.
Thanks, Chair. My query is also around the kind of data mapping and responsive transport. I'm just thinking about my ward of Armley, which is only a couple of miles from the city centre. I see an increasing use of taxis on the estate where I live, and I'm just wondering about not just the responsive travel, but maybe like the kind of shuttle bus idea. So like there is between the hospitals in I'm just thinking if there's data mapping available, say for example about school routes and things like that people are using for those short journeys to school or to the doctors and things like that, whether that kind of shuttle bus approach could work. Thank you.
It's like the access bus, isn't it? It's that kind of thing, really.
It is, yeah. And I think that's one of the learnings we will get from because one of the areas we're trialling with the Flexibus in East Leeds is the East End Park area, which is a little bit similar to Armley in terms of its distance from the city centre, and it's also It also has that issue where, yeah, there's plenty of buses on main roads, but most of the people live actually quite a long way from the main roads, and how that works. So we'll get some learning as to whether or not that sort of service, which doesn't take people from the city centre, it's there to take people to other local destinations, as to whether or not that's a solution we can lift and move into other areas.
Thank you. Howard Hughes.
About the priority customer groups, I think this is quite a difficult question, and I suppose clearly one could envisage that it's a good thing to provide better bus services to more deprived areas of the city, to enable people to access employment, etc. But if we're thinking a key objective is in terms of carbon reduction, then we need to persuade people in the high car ownership areas of the city to leave their cars at home and to use the buses. So I think really we need a bus network for everybody. So everybody in the city needs access really to a good bus network.
Yeah, somebody else mentioned that in the chat as well about priority customer groups. Really, we want something better for everybody, but that costs more, doesn't it? I suppose it depends how much money we've got to go around. But I suppose the other thing is simplicity. We want simplicity, but then if you have different fares with different people, then it gets complex. So, Dave,
yes.
Over to you.
Yes, these are all the sort of dichotomies that we've got to work with here, aren't they? I mean, Howard actually just make a really good point that that we need to do both of those things. We do need to improve connectivity and improve access to employment, particularly for people in deprived communities. And that's really a role. And I think one of the things that Councillor Groves will back me up on here, because we talked to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation a couple of years ago, who used West Yorkshire as one of their pilot areas or test areas, that demonstrated that actually where the jobs are and where the people who could occupy those jobs are not particularly well connected by bus, and particularly where those jobs are on the edge of towns, or in the case of the example of Joseph Rowntree, it's a bit of an extreme example of the Joseph Rowntree used in terms of Sherburn and Elmet and East Leeds, where they're just not connected, and yet that's where some of the distribution jobs that were available were. So that's one issue. And yet the other dichotomy is that if you actually want to reduce car journeys, then you're probably trying to target a different group of people. And we sort of want to do both of these things. And I think that's the dilemma. And I think, as you said, Councillor Hinchcliffe, it is a dichotomy as well. If you want to tailor something for different groups of people and make it simpler for everybody, those two things are a clunky mix as well. So, and that's what we're sort of navigating through, really. I'm sure there are ways of making things simpler that benefit everybody, but we do need to sort of do those trade-offs.
Sean from Kirklees Public something or other. Sorry, Sean, if you want to just say who you are, I can't quite get it from your name. Sean, you're on mute.
There we go. Sean Jordan from Kirklees representative. There used to be a lot of discussion previously about the hub and spoke model, where you get a high frequency double deckers down the main roads fed into by low floor small buses coming in from the estates. And I noticed around Kirklees there's always a lot of housing developments, but the bus services routes and areas haven't changed a lot since over the last 10-15 years. They're still going up and down the same routes, even though outlying areas particularly where the housing developments often around Kirklees, up on Greenfield South, on the edge of conurbations, the bus routes don't change. I mean, there's a main area in Kirklees called Hayde Edge. Yeah, there's massive development of housing and it's now expanding. There's lots of housing, but the buses don't go anywhere near it. Yeah, a simple change in the route could bring in somewhere like Hayde Edge. Thanks.
Yeah, they're fair criticisms, yes, in terms of things that are linking planning with transport planning is something I think collectively everybody could do better. The hub and spoke point is a good one, and I think it does sort of require a high frequency to high frequency connection. So in other words, the minibus or the smaller bus or whatever that takes you to the hub needs to be quite frequent, so that you then connect into another frequent service to get to your other journey. If you have to wait 25 minutes at the hub, then it sort of doesn't work for people. So the hub and spoke principle is great, but it does require quite a lot of resource as well. I think the other thing that is an interesting point I would put back into the discussion is that in my experiences, having been to quite a lot of sort of community meetings and things like that, is that everybody wants their own direct bus to the town centre and another direct bus, or the same direct bus to the local hospital. And if we want to, have a more efficient sort of network, then some people might have to change buses more to make the journeys that they want to make, or live with a less frequent direct service. Those are the sort of trade-offs that sort of emerge out of these sort of issues.
Okay, I think Howard, is that an old hand? Howard?
It's an old hand.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much. So with that, then we'll move on to the next one, I think, because I can't see anybody else indicating, which is bus infrastructure. Councillor Salam mentioned this right at the outset. It's the most difficult thing to achieve actually quickly, because obviously it means road space, and road space is very much at a premium, isn't it, Dave? But anyway, do you want to?
It is, and I think that when we ask bus customers, passengers, what's the most important thing to them, then reliability, punctuality is the most important thing. And if you ask people who don't use the bus why they don't use the bus, if they've got a bus service available to them, they'll say it either takes too long or I can't rely on it. So to a certain extent, to really get more people on buses, we've got to actually make the buses something people have confidence in using, and that is a big part of that in terms of how the bus operates within the highway. And that's a wider issue than just bus lanes and that sort of thing. But one of the elements of this is how do we sort of use the funding available that we can invest in the highway network to improve bus services. And I think one of the elements of the bus service improvement plan that reads across to other investment programs is how do we sort of prioritize buses over other road users, and that's what the National Bus Strategy is encouraging as well. So at national level and at local level, there's an encouragement to do that. How you do it is actually the challenging part, I think Councillor Hinchcliffe alludes to. So it does involve things like bus lanes, bus gates, traffic signal priority. It does involve things like in making sure the facilities there are enforced as well, and I think it's not on the slide, but I think that's a key element that comes out of our discussions. And it does look at in terms of things like car parking charges and what alternatives are available to people as well. And I think one of the challenges we have in our towns and city centres is curb space for buses. In terms of the amount of what we mean by that is how much space we've got in terms for bus stops, but also how much footpath space we've got for passengers as well. And we've probably all seen some fairly busy bus stops in our towns and city centres. So all of those things which we need to look at. Tom, we need to move to the next slide. And then I think we're just putting these questions out there for a bit of discussion. What the factors that cause delay for buses, locations where we should really be focusing our efforts to improve bus infrastructure, and how do we slow down general traffic and speed up buses? Because that's sort of the exam question which has been set here. So I'll open that up for further
Are we also consulting the key route network at the moment, Dave?
We will. I think we will be shortly. Yes. So
linked to this, isn't it?
And that's linked in terms of some of the bus routes, but obviously a lot of bus routes won't be on the key routes. But yeah, it's key route network opens up possibilities like red routes and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. Mark Parry, where are you from, Mark?
It's generally accepted now that while you increase the road space for cars, you induce extra traffic. But we're trying to get a modal shift away from cars and onto buses. And I would like to see an actual reduction in the road space for cars over time. But I mean, the question is, how do you do this? What comes first? Do you take the space away first, or you try and boost the bus passengers first?
So it's another chicken and egg question, I think.
Yeah.
It is little, and to a certain extent, this is very much an evolutionary process, isn't it? And I think one of the things we want to do is identify what's the best sort of return on the investment, for want of a better expression, in terms of improving the operation of buses that we can get with the infrastructure we want to do, rather than some big radical remodeling of the road network, which is quite challenging. But then, if to meet our collective carbon reduction challenges, then I think Mark's points are absolutely valid in the longer term. But I think to a certain extent that the bus service improvement plan's got to look at what in the short term are the things we should be doing.
Thank you. John Shepherd?
Yeah, certainly we should slow down general traffic. General traffic is slowing down anyway, so anything that we do is only going to improve that or disprove it, depending which way you look at it. But if we slow down general traffic and we can speed up buses, then yes, that's part of the overall plan. At the moment, we have traffic lights coming out of Leeds, going towards Armley, and the buses come along the bus lane and the traffic light turns to green for the bus. That's great. We have traffic lights coming out of Bradford going towards Huddersfield. And if the driver goes to the green traffic light, he has to wait frustratingly while one or two goes on the other road, allow the cars to get in front of him. No wonder drivers don't go in that lane. They go in the car lane and crawl along with all the other cars. Similarly, the traffic lights which are on the Woodside Road going past Wyke. There's one which is dedicated to buses in the bus lane, but most drivers actually nip out into the car lane because they don't want to wait for their traffic light to change while the car drivers go by. Surely there's some way of making sure that buses get priority at traffic lights which are meant for buses.
I thought we had these, what they call them. There's a funny name for these traffic lights that do that now. I thought that was everywhere now, Dave.
Not everywhere, no.
Call them those things.
Yeah, where essentially the bus carries a sensor that triggers the traffic lights, have you got me struggling for the terminology?
Can anybody remember what it is? It's some animal thing, isn't it? A name or something? I can't remember what it is now.
There's the Scoot system.
Scoot, that's it. Scoot.
And the Scoot system is where traffic signals are integrated, and that the Scoot system can enable that signal priority for buses in a better way. But you can do it on an individual sort of signal junction by signal junction way as well for those areas. That Scoot connects all the traffic signals together in a management system. So yes, there's an awful lot of technology things you can do to make buses run through. And I think as has been pointed out, there's an inconsistency of application of that. And that's probably a wider issue around the sort of rollout of intelligent traffic control that can happen. I think there's a point that Catherine Keithley made on the chat, actually, which is worth calling out here as well. Some of this is actually just making the things that are there work better, and I think that we will be identifying in the bus service improvement plan that the need for enforcement, on bus lanes, but also the need for parking enforcement. It can be the little things that sometimes slow buses down, but vehicles parked in the wrong place can actually cause quite a lot of hold-ups.
Yeah, good point, and that's something that we should be able to do quite quickly. If you think about all the things that we can do, we don't have to build a new bus lane, you just need to enforce what's there. Clive?
Yeah, I mean, the first question, what is our experience? Well, journey times have gone up incredibly in the last couple of years, but just pre-COVID. I think the bus company first didn't want buses to be late arriving, so they built in journey times went up in some cases at peak times by a third. So making the journey extremely long so they weren't late. But the trouble with that is congestion isn't the same every day. And so quite often you were stuck for 10 minutes at a bus stop because there was too much time for many of the journeys. So, I mean, there's a real problem. You've got to have bus priority. It says here, are there any locations that we should be improving? Well, I can give lots of examples. I mean, we've suggested them in the past. Now, recently, there was a very good map, interactive map on Wyker where you could make suggestions. I don't know if that's still up and running, but it seemed a very good way of dealing with the complexity of West Yorkshire, if you like, and for Wyker to get information about the sort of detail that would make real improvements. But there weren't many comments. I mean, I made comments, there weren't many. And I don't know whether the general public were aware of this opportunity. So the final point, should we slow down general traffic? I think the one way to ensure that people use our buses is for it to be quicker on the bus. And the only way will be if we have bus priority. But actually, it's a virtuous circle, I think they call it, because if a lot of people desert their cars for buses, then yes, there will actually be all the traffic speeded up. But bus priority is the crucial thing. And I think the programme needs to be far more adventurous than is currently proposed.
Thank you. Howard, is that still your legacy hand, or did you want to speak?
No, it's a new point.
Right, go on then, Howard.
So about infrastructure, in Leeds, we've had quite extensive consultation as part of the Connecting Leeds work. It seems to me that the lion's share of the money seems to have been spent in the city centre. I mean, yes, it's probably needed there, but I live in North Leeds and hardly any money has been spent on infrastructure on routes into North Leeds. So I'd suggest that there are potential schemes that could be taken forward and that are probably almost ready to go. And I'd suggest particularly Harrogate Road, leading north out of Leeds. There are 3 bus routes use that, which have a 10-minute frequency. So I would have thought that taking forward the schemes that have been consulted on would be very beneficial. I'd also just like to mention about do we slow down general traffic to speed up buses? For me, I think the priority should be on giving the buses priority. It may be a result of that general traffic slows down. But I think that in talking about general traffic, I think we need to remember that not all general traffic are naughty people who should be using buses instead of cars. There are a lot of people who are working. We have an army of care workers. Certainly prior to the pandemic, the bulk of community mental health services are delivered by people visiting people in their homes. So if we slow down general traffic, we'll be putting up the cost of care to people in their homes. and damaging the economy as well.
Okay, some good points there. Paul Moses, you've been mentioned a bit in dispatches during this meeting, Paul, and you put something in the chat as well about Councillor Howood's point about Hayes Edge, is it?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to sort of pick up on Clive's views there on the 33, 34 routes, and I made that service change, Clive, we did get a little bit wrong where we did see buses waiting for a long period of time at bus stops. I think it's important to realise we only put time, which is resource, into services to make them reliable. I don't think there's any point in having a bus service where we know it's not going to work just to keep journey times at a certain level. And just to sort of put that into context, we are now putting more buses into the 33, 34 cycle than we did pre-pandemic. Just to try and keep some reliability in there while we've got numerous roadworks en route and in the city centre. I certainly share your views on bus priority down that corridor, as we do see ridiculous journey times even now, and more journey times in the afternoon peak coming into Leeds than what we see in the direction you'd imagine at peak times. So I think, yeah, bus priority is a big thing, and certainly in certain areas of Leeds where we need that more than possibly others. And so I'll just touch on Hayes Edge. Councillor Homewood mentioned Hayes Edge, and we are aware of the large development around there. So I know one of my members of staff met with local users down there, and we are currently progressing plans to save Hayes Edge, and also they'll be shared, James, once we have them available. Thank you, Chair.
Homewood, are you satisfied with that?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say it wasn't actually me who mentioned Hayes Edge, so I can't take credit for it. It was one of the public representatives, but thank you for that. No, it's all right. I don't want to take credit for something I didn't say. I was just going to make another point around how this maybe feeds in as well to our kind of environmental assessment of particularly infrastructure and road schemes around our obviously carbon reduction, because I do find that obviously there's sometimes a general opposition to road schemes on the basis that road schemes must equal more traffic, which is environmentally bad. And actually, obviously, if we can do things like improve bus infrastructure, we need to have road improvements to achieve that. But I also think that in the same breath, when we're talking about slowing down general traffic, broadly, yes, I agree with that. But I think we have to then obviously balance, does that mean slowing down, or does that mean creating more standing traffic and congestion? Because there's obviously a significant air quality impact of that too. And a lot of our, poorest and vulnerable residents live in areas where main routes, main roads have poor air quality. So I think we have to do those assessments and balances when we're taking forward schemes and infrastructure to say, what is the kind of net benefit to the environmental benefit? And obviously improvement in public transport is a benefit in that area, I would say. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of feed in how we make sure that's taken into account in any kind of environmental assessments that we do.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. This doesn't include new buses, does it, Dave?
Not this particular element, but new buses are really part of the plan for decarbonising the bus network, which is we touch on the next slide and sort of overlays all of this. And it's a big challenge across all sectors, decarbonisation, and one of the targets is to have a zero carbon bus network by 2036, which essentially means all new buses from now on become zero carbon, and that sort of flushes through the fleet renewal process to get us to that point. But that does involve a significant element of investment, both in private sector and public sector investment, and in all honesty, I don't think the national government or at local government level, or in the private sector either, we've got our collective heads around that. To be honest, we have this thing called Zebra funding for zero carbon buses that we're participating in. it'll bring some new electric buses into the fleet, but it's a much bigger task to zero carbon.
Thank you. And Howard, is that a legacy hand or is that a new hand?
Legacy hand.
All right. Okay. So I think we're done then on now. We're not really done now. There's lots more we could say, I'm sure. But you wanted to raise some other issues, I think, Dave?
Yeah, I think that the next one really was just to wash up all the other issues. And I think we've actually touched on quite a few of these things as we've gone through the conversation. The bus service improvement plan will establish a customer charter and a consistent set of guarantees of customer service elements to across the piece. We've been working quite closely with bus operators the last couple of years on this type of approach, so that whoever's company bus people get on, they can expect the same standard of service, the same follow-up if they've got a complaint or a query, and we introduced the last bus guarantee a couple of years ago, so that we make sure that last buses run, and if they don't, people are properly compensated for that. But the main emphasis is to make sure the service runs. Communications and branding is quite important, and I think we've touched on that a little bit, and I think it's quite important that the customers see one network, not a series of different bus companies' products, but a single network. And we're making the first steps towards that with the Core Bus network launch that we did in Leeds, and will spread to West Yorkshire. I think I've touched on air quality and decarbonisation and how we need to move the bus network initially to clean diesel and then to electric and or hydrogen to meet our zero carbon requirements. Community connectivity, I think we've touched on integration between different modes of travel, and I think one of the things that does sort of right through all of what we do is to make sure we do sort of think about how the bus service can help more people be included in wider society, and how the bus service supports that. So I think a sort of next final discussion element was really around customer experience. I think we've touched on some of those things, and sort of, are we missing anything? Are there any elements that we haven't touched on this afternoon that we need to give some thought to in writing the bus service improvement plan?
Thank you, Dave. Somebody just put in the chat about better timetabling of buses between providers. I mean, you mentioned there about looking like one service across West Yorkshire. Is that something that's included within that?
I think it's an important factor, and I think coordination. It can be more difficult than it sounds. That, and I think if you ask somebody like Paul Moses on the call and others, scheduling a bus is quite a complicated thing to do. But I think it's a fair criticism that the network doesn't coordinate as well as it could do, and particularly in terms of linking people to the solid common destinations. If people do need to change buses to go to the hospital, for example, in the centre of a town or city, is a hospital bus near enough the other bus services for people to do that seamlessly? It's that sort of thing we need to address.
Paul, did you want to come in on that? Paul Moses?
Yeah, thank you. I think we are doing this, and we've seen a lot better sort of integration with other operators throughout the region, such as we are now using operators to do some work for us while we're suffering from the current sort of driver shortage crisis that the industry is going through. Such, moving work between depots to try and accommodate that as well. So it's something that is happening, and I know we've got some ideas around Huddersfield particularly, where we can work with other operators to provide a sort of mini hub and spoke section for certain areas. So it's something that we do look at, and we will see a lot more integration between operators in the near future.
Good. John Shepherd.
Yeah, hardly new points, but are we missing anything and how do we improve? Well, of course, the bus shelters, which we've talked about many times, waiting in the rain for a bus which doesn't turn up isn't going to enamour any potential passengers. And at the moment, an awful lot of buses are not turning up. I'm going for the world record. I've managed to miss 7 buses so far this week, not because I've been late, but because they didn't come. And it's only Thursday yet. So fortunately, this week, we've not been having a lot of rain, but sometimes we do. And people just don't like standing there again and again and again in the rain. They'll find some other way of doing it. If there is a bus shelter, then it's great to have within it a little thing which tells you when the next bus is going to come. And we've got quite a few of these now. And the good old unreadable television screens seem to be phased out. That's great. But we need more of the readable ones all over the place as well. And again, not just in Leeds or a few key other places. And finally, we've said it many times before, there are people who still like to read a timetable. And at the moment, an awful lot of bus stops and bus shelters don't even have a timetable. If you've got a next bus sign and it says, please refer to timetable, that just puts the icing on the cake.
Thank you. I mean, that's a good point, Dave, isn't it, about incremental improvements as well, like the digital signs on bus stops.
It is. I mean, I'll hold my hands up about the bus stop timetables because it's an absolute fair call, and just for me to explain that to people, they're not very good at the moment because last year, in the height of the pandemic, bus services were changing just about every month, and rather than have incorrect information out there, we basically replaced them with some filler timetables to point people to the electronic information, which we did keep up to date on the websites and on mobile devices, and on the screens. We're in the process of reintroducing those bus timetables, but it was very much a sort of a COVID thing. We didn't want to leave wrong information out there, and because of all the difficulties we had with workforce and all the other things that the pandemic brought, that's the bus stops aren't in a particularly good state in terms of timetable information. We fully accept that, and we're in the process of sorting that out. The screens, we put a lot of screens into Leeds because we have the Leeds Public Transport Improvement Programme. We've got the Transforming Cities Fund, which will put more screens into other parts of the city, other parts of the region. So we've got a plan to do that. We can't have them everywhere. But we do accept the fact that you can actually get that information on mobile phone as well, and we do promote that, so people can on their mobile phone get a bespoke timetable and next bus timetable for their particular stop, using the QR code which is on the bus stop. So we're reflective of that as well. It's a fair point around bus shelters. Sometimes the size of bus shelter is determined by the amount of footpath space we can use to put it on, but do understand the importance of people waiting in the dry.
Why can't we have digital signs at every bus stop?
We have 14,000 bus stops.
How many digital thingies do we have?
We probably have several thousand, I think, now. I shall get that number. But yeah, I think it's pretty. We've probably got bigger spread than lots of other parts of the country. But I think our aspiration would be to have them in the busier stops everywhere, which is the approach we've taken. And we introduced in Leeds, and we'll introduce these in other parts. Not just in bus shelters as well. So we've introduced these battery-powered ones, which are on the bus stops where there isn't any room to put a bus shelter. So we've got a plan around introducing those in a much wider network.
So remind me, is it capital? Is it revenue rather than capital? The bus improvement money?
It's a bit of both. So the capital element of it is in the City Region Transport Fund as well, so it links through to that. But the Department of Transport have indicated that some of this funding would be revenue, which is, in some respects, the revenue is the area funding which we're always short of, but revenue funding needs to be a recurring every year thing, and the government will only give us it once. So we need to find creative ways of making the best use of a longest period of what money comes.
Thank you. Howard's saying about need to consider potential role of express limited stop buses.
Yes, and some operators have introduced some of those in recent years with certain degree of success. Converting existing services to limited stop can be unpopular because it means that some stops aren't served anymore. So you almost need to overlay them on the existing service for that to actually work. But I think there is other parts of the country, particularly in Scotland, the express long distance bus is quite a popular mode of transport, and that there may be a call for that, more of that in our region.
Well, there's a specific instance. I hope we've somebody cataloguing this chat, because there's Old Farnley Terminus has an old style LCD display that hardly works and could be upgraded. So things like that probably just need to be picked up.
If it's the old style,
matter of course.
If it's the old style TV one that was referred to earlier, then it should be being replaced, because their time expired anyway. We're getting rid of them.
There's old bus stops that are no longer in use, ought to be removed. Do we have those? I don't think I've seen.
We shouldn't have many. There might be one or two who that we normally. We do normally move them on if the bus routes have changed. But if there are examples, I'm sure my colleagues can.
If you want to put any example in the chat, we can pick that up. Therefore, so it's always a difficult question to answer, isn't it? Are we missing anything?
It always is. Yes. It's easy question to ask.
Exactly. You can't always see what you're missing.
Yeah.
So somebody's put in the chat where that bus stop is, by the way, I think. I think that obviously we've had a presentation today. If you can send this round as well to people.
Yes, sorry, I thought it had gone to people.
Next steps. Do you want to do the next steps then, Dave?
I think we touched on this. We've got today's session. We'll go to the Transport Committee on September with what what the plan's beginning to look like. We need a sign-off process through the Bus Alliance Executive Board, because the bus operators need to be comfortable with the plan which we're presenting as well. So we'll do that there, and then we'll bring it to the Combined Authority on the 22nd of October for the sort of final sign-off for the submission to the Department of Transport, and then we'll bring the Transport Committee up to speed with what the outcome of that is.
Super. And if anybody wants to, if anything occurs to them after this meeting.
Yeah, I mean, by all means, email in the feedback and comments, and we can incorporate that. We'll send out to everybody on the call a copy of the presentation and a copy of the email address to respond to.
And obviously we're coming out of lockdown now, but I mean, somebody was just asking about how wide we're going to engage with people, etc. on this. I don't know. I haven't got an awful lot of time left, have we?
We haven't, and that's part of the problem, is that we would like to have done more public engagement on it, but we are driven by government timescales who do set very tight deadlines. The reason why there is a tight deadline on this and under other funding requirements, which you have to go back to government on, is they want these in before the comprehensive spending review that government has towards the end of the year. So we're sort of working to that timescale. That said, I think one of the things we do need to do is consult people on the enhanced partnership, and I think one of the intentions is to have a much bigger bus conversation type consultation probably next year, where we try and get this discussion into as many dare I say, to try to reach the people we don't always engage with on these issues to get their views as well.
Okay, I've just got Jeff Wood and Clive Woods, or just an S between them. Jeff?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just, I'm a public representative from Coaldale, and I was just wondering whether or not there's more that we could do about naming bus stops so that to encourage people to understand the network a little better. It's particularly important for modal shift, so that people can actually see the name of a bus stop from their seat or from the street and actually understand where they are and how they can plan their journey more. Because I think we do have a problem with modal shift in that if we're kind of in an echo chamber where we're constantly talking to bus users, but we're not talking to non-bus users.
Yeah,
that's narrative names, do you mean, bus stops?
Well, something that it doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's clear where it is and something that people can clearly identify.
Dave, do you get that?
Yes, and we've done a little bit of this, but there's probably more to be done. One of the things which we will be rolling out with the core network elements, the colour-coded scheme, is new flags on bus stops, which have more clearly the name of the stop. I do take the point that if you're sat on the bus, you don't tend to see that. So maybe certain destinations do need a little bit more description to them. We do, all of our bus stop flags actually do say the name of the stop, but they're often the main road, side road as a description, which is sort of accurate, but also not entirely helpful either. So yeah, it's a fair call, and I think it's something, particularly at certain key destinations, we could look at doing a little bit more of. I know Manchester bus stops do tend to have the location name more prevalent than West Yorkshire ones. That would be something we can look at.
That issue about whether you can actually read it from the bus, from your seat, is really important.
Yeah.
Somebody's saying as well, each stop where it announced the stop.
And audiovisual announcements are a thing that's being rolled out on buses as well, and that's a national initiative to all new buses to have audiovisual announcements. They haven't been without their challenges technology-wise to get them right, but I think the idea of audiovisual announcements that tell people where they are is quite helpful. And picking up Mr. Wood's comment is maybe we do need to think a little bit more about how we describe the location better.
Okay. So, Clive Woods, I think you're going to have the last question of the session. Congratulations.
Right, thank you very much, Councillor. Just 2 quick points. I mentioned the interactive map that you have as a consultation exercise at the moment. Could you say a bit more about that and try and get more use of it? Because I think it's got a lot of potential. And the second thing is the real-time battery-operated flags at bus stops. Great to have them. They've got a good idea and a facility where you press a button and you hear the information, and that presumably is to help people who are visually impaired. But the two locally for us, you just cannot hear. The speaker seems to be high up on the flag, and it's just traffic noise, or even when it's quiet, you just cannot hear it. So before get any more of them, it does need looking at, and I think redesigning.
Yes,
so,
yeah.
Has that been pointed out before?
It has, yes. We obviously, this is a relatively new thing we've been introducing, and my colleagues just waved at me because we tried a few out, and some were better than others in terms of audibility. So they do need to be checked out. I think you're quite right there, Clive. That there is an element of customizing them for the local traffic needs, so traffic noise level. So there's a bit to do there. The interactive map, yeah, I think we'll do more of that. It was introduced as part, particularly with the Connecting Leeds consultations and some of the consultations we've done recently, and for the benefit of wider people. it's where you when you do an online consultation, you actually create a map that people can then put a flag in saying, can you put one of these there, type of thing. And that's actually quite useful for as a technique. And I think that's one we've quite a few of our consultations now are using that sort of social media type of approach in consultations. So I wouldn't rule out as doing something more of that in the future. Yeah, I think that's the way in which we do engage with people, is give them opportunity to give us some very specific local based contact and point to it on a map.
I think the bus stops with the speakers, if the speaker could be near the button, then I think that would be very helpful. I think high up is going to be difficult. But
yeah, the height is sometimes determined by the site and clearances and things like that. But yeah, we do need to get to sort of tweak these things. You're quite right.
Lovely. Right. So I think we're like 1 minute to go. If there's any other burning questions, I think you can probably send those through to is it Tom? Tom Locke. But otherwise we can capture the chat. Some good points being made in the chat as we've gone through. And thank you very much, everybody. I think you have 2 of these a year in your own districts, which are useful. And then this is an annual basis. So I'm sure you will participate at your next meeting. And it's been very useful hearing what you have to say. Expert users, thank you.
Yes, and
thank you very much, everybody. Dave, anything else from you?
No, just thank everybody for their input. I think it's been really, really sort of rich level of content we've got through, and it'll help us shape this plan going forward.
Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.